"You're just a pitiful Omega," he sneered, deliberately stepping his bespoke Oxford shoes onto the meticulously audited financial report scattered across the floor. "Know your place." What Drake didn't realize as his oppressive cedar scent choked the room. My place was at the head of the acquisitions table, and by tomorrow morning, his beloved company would be entirely mine. Pheromones heavy with unearned arrogance masked the stale smell of cheap breakroom coffee in the corporate bullpen of Rochester Innovations. Slouched in a miserably unergonomic chair, dressed in a fraying cardigan that smelled faintly of vanilla and submissiveness, sat Artie. Artie was a temp, an Omega, and the favorite punching bag of the 64th floor. Artie was also a complete fabrication. Beneath the oversized glasses and the carefully calibrated scent dampeners, alias Kingsley, CEO of the multi-billion-dollar private equity firm Kingsley Holdings, was quietly doing what a fleet of McKinsey consultants could never do: finding the rotting core of a prospective acquisition. Rochester Innovations was highly valued on paper. They held patents for next-generation biometric encryption that had Silicon Valley salivating. Our analysts had recommended a clean $3 billion buyout. But a decade of clawing my way up the corporate ladder in an alpha-dominated world, surviving the vicious, predatory environment of the Wharton School of Business and outmaneuvering Wall Street veterans, had taught me never to trust a spreadsheet. Deloitte could audit their books all day, but they couldn't audit a company's soul. So I had my fiercely loyal Vice President of Acquisitions, Tristan Vasques, forge a background as an unremarkable temp. I wanted to see how the alpha executives behaved when they thought nobody of consequence was watching. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. Drake Rochester, the founder and CEO, was a textbook example of a man failing upward on the sheer strength of his alpha biology. He was undeniably striking, with broad shoulders tailored to perfection in Italian wool, sharp jawline, and a commanding presence that practically bled a suffocating, woodsy scent of cedar and black pepper. He used that scent like a weapon. Instead of managing his engineers, he bullied them. Instead of negotiating with vendors, he intimidated them with aggressive pheromone spikes that left the betas nauseous and the omegas trembling. For 3 weeks, I endured his reign of terror. I fetched his dry cleaning. I organized his chaotic, poorly managed calendar. I smiled demurely and lowered my eyes every time he barked an order, meticulously logging every instance of gross mismanagement, every SEC compliance violation he casually dismissed, and every brilliant idea he stole from his subordinates and passed off as his own to the board of directors. The climax of my miserable undercover assignment arrived on a bleak Thursday afternoon. The bullpen was eerily quiet. Word had leaked that a major Series C funding round, led by Sequoia Capital, had unexpectedly collapsed. Sequoia's lead partner had seen through Drake's bluster and demanded structural changes Drake was too proud to make. The atmosphere in the office was thick with impending doom. The heavy glass door of the executive suite violently swung open. Drake stormed out, his alpha pheromones flaring so sharply the air tasted like ash. Veins strained against his neck as he glared around the room, hunting for a target to absorb his humiliation. His dark eyes landed on my desk. "Artie!" His voice boomed, rattling the cheap plastic partitions of my cubicle. I stood up, keeping my posture deferential, projecting the manufactured vanilla scent of a frightened Omega. "Yes, Mr. Rochester?" "The Q3 expenditure reports," he snarled, closing the distance between us in 3 long, predatory strides. He slammed a thick manila folder onto my desk. Papers spilled everywhere. Spreadsheets, cost analyses, projection models. Did you compile these? Yes, sir. Exactly as you instructed, following the parameters you gave me on Tuesday. You incompetent little freak, he hissed, leaning in so close I could see the furious pulse jumping at his temple. These numbers are garbage. The R&D burn rate is completely exposed. If the board sees this, they'll think we're bleeding cash. I told you to smooth out the quarterly projections. You told me to commit corporate fraud, sir, I replied, my voice soft, letting a tiny sliver of my true self bleed through the meek facade. I simply formatted the raw data provided by your accounting department. Silence crashed over the bullpen. A beta engineer 2 desks over actually gasped. Omegas did not talk back to Alphas. Omegas certainly did not accuse Alpha CEOs of fraud in the middle of an open-plan office. Drake's eyes widened in sheer disbelief, and then narrowed into slits of pure, concentrated malice. He stepped into my personal space, deliberately releasing a wave of dominance pheromones designed to force an Omega to their knees. It took every ounce of discipline I possessed, every meditation technique I'd mastered over 15 years of corporate warfare, to simply sway slightly instead of baring my teeth and challenging him right back. He reached out and forcefully shoved the remaining stack of papers off my desk. They fluttered to the carpet like dead leaves. "Clean it up," he ordered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, rumbling growl. I looked at the floor, then back at him. I didn't move. A cruel, mocking smile twisted his handsome face. He stepped forward, planting his expensive Oxford shoe squarely onto the summary page of the report, leaving a muddy smear across the financial truth he was so desperate to hide. "You're just a pitiful Omega," he sneered, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. "You have no ambition, no intellect, and no understanding of how the real world works. You are a glorified secretary who is lucky I don't throw you out onto the street right now. Know your place." He turned on his heel, his cedar scent lingering like a toxic cloud, and marched back into his office, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. I slowly knelt on the carpet. I didn't pick up the papers. Instead, I pulled my burner phone from my cardigan pocket and sent a single text message to Tristan Vasques. "The audit is complete. Execute the hostile takeover. Buy the debt from Goldman Sachs at a premium if you have to. I want his head on a platter by 9 a.m. tomorrow." I stood up, leaving the ruined papers on the floor. I walked to the coat rack, grabbed my umbrella, and calmly walked to the elevator. Artie was dead. The predator was finally taking off his leash. Rain lashed violently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse overlooking the financial district, washing away the pathetic, subservient persona I had worn for 21 grueling days. Friday morning had arrived. I stood in the center of my marble-tiled master bathroom, scrubbing the last remnants of the vanilla scent-dampening soap from my skin. As the hot water sluiced over my shoulders, I felt my biology rebel against weeks of suppression. My true scent began to bloom, rising into the steam, a sharp, chilling blend of crushed winter mint and the metallic tang of ozone right before a lightning strike. It wasn't the warm, comforting scent of a domestic Omega. It was the scent of a storm. Stepping out of the shower, I walked into my walk-in closet. The fraying cardigans and cheap slacks were already in the trash. Today called for armor. I slid into a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit, the tailoring flawlessly accentuating the sharp lines of my shoulders and narrow waist. A crisp, spread-collar Tom Ford shirt, a silk tie in a deep blood-red hue, and my platinum Rolex Daytona completed the ensemble. I looked exactly like what I was. A man who bought and dismantled legacies before breakfast. Downstairs, Tristan was waiting in the back of the idling Maybach. Tristan was a beta, completely immune to the pheromone games alphas played, which made him the deadliest negotiator in my arsenal. He handed me an espresso and a leather-bound folio as I slid into the luxurious leather seat. Goldman Sachs played ball, Tristan said smoothly, tapping his tablet. We bought up all of Rochester's leveraged debt in a dark pool transaction at 2 a.m. They missed their covenant ratios last month, which means the debt is callable immediately. They either pay us $400 million by noon, or we execute the convertible clauses and take 51% of their voting shares. He doesn't have 400 million, I murmured, taking a sip of the espresso. Sequoia pulled out yesterday. Exactly, Tristan smirked. Drake Rochester has called an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. He thinks a mysterious white knight from Kingsley Holdings is coming to offer a generous buyout to save him. Oh, I'm coming. I smiled coldly, glancing out the rain-streaked window as we pulled up to the towering glass edifice of Rochester Innovations. But I didn't bring my white armor. We didn't take the service elevator this time. We walked through the grand marble lobby, our security detail parting the sea of arriving employees. The receptionist, an alpha who usually ignored me when I was arty, stood up to demand our identification, only to freeze when she caught my scent. The wintermint and ozone rolled off me in freezing waves. It was an Omega scent, yes, but laced with such intense apex predator confidence that it short-circuited her instincts. We walked past her without a word. The executive boardroom on the 64th floor was thick with tension. As Tristan and I approached the heavy mahogany doors, I could hear Drake's voice leaking into the hallway. We stand firm, Drake was insisting, his cedar scent souring with underlying panic. Kingsley Holdings needs our biometric patents. They will pay our valuation. I am the founder of this company, and I will not let some faceless private equity vultures dictate our terms. I pushed the mahogany doors open. They swung inward with a heavy, ominous thud. The entire board of directors turned to look at the intrusion. There were 12 of them, mostly older alphas and a few wealthy betas. At the head of the long table stood Drake, his hands planted firmly on the polished wood, his chest puffed out in a classic alpha display of dominance. When his eyes landed on me, his brain completely failed to process the image. He blinked. He looked at my Brioni suit, the platinum watch, the cold, dead-eyed stare I leveled at him. Then he looked at Tristan, recognizing him instantly from Forbes magazine features as the ruthless right hand of Kingsley Holdings. Artie, Drake blurted out, the sheer confusion making his voice crack. The absolute absurdity of seeing his punching bag's temp flanked by corporate security broke his composure. What the hell are you doing? How did you get those clothes? Get out of here immediately. The CEO of Kingsley Holdings is about to arrive. I didn't answer right away. I walked slowly down the length of the boardroom, my leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. Tristan flanked my right, silent and imposing. I let my scent drop its restraints entirely. The freezing wintermint and ozone flooded the room, rapidly devouring Drake's aggressive cedar, pushing it back into the corners. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs, their primal instincts suddenly screaming that the most dangerous person in the room was the Omega currently walking toward the head of the table. Artie, I repeated, tasting the name on my tongue like poison. A fascinating social experiment. Though I must admit, the coffee here was genuinely atrocious. I reached the head of the table. I didn't ask Drake to move. I simply stared at him, projecting an aura of absolute authority until subconsciously His alpha instincts buckled under the weight of my financial and social superiority. He took a stumbling step backward. I calmly took his chair at the head of the table, sitting back and crossing my legs. "Let me introduce myself properly, since my resume as a temporary assistant was apparently lacking," I said, my voice smooth, resonant, and echoing in the dead silent room. "My name is Alias Kingsley. I am the CEO and majority shareholder of Kingsley Holdings. And as of 2 a.m. this morning, I am your largest creditor." A collective gasp echoed from the board members. Drake's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ashen gray. His jaw worked silently, trying to form words that wouldn't come. You're Kingsley," Drake whispered, gripping the edge of the table as if the floor had suddenly tilted. "But you're an Omega," I finished for him, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Yes, Drake, I am. And this pitiful Omega just bought your debt from Goldman Sachs. You are in breach of your financial covenants due to the fraudulent Q3 expenditure reports you attempted to force me to conceal yesterday." I gestured to Tristan, who began tossing thick, meticulously bound legal dossiers onto the table in front of each board member. "Here is the reality of your situation," I addressed the board, ignoring Drake entirely. "Rochester Innovations is bleeding capital. Sequoia Capital fled because your CEO is an incompetent megalomaniac who relies on pheromones instead of business acumen. You owe Kingsley Holdings $400 million, payable right now." I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the terror sink into their bones. "Since I know you don't have the liquidity," I continued softly, finally turning my freezing gaze back to Drake, who was trembling, "I am executing the convertible clauses on your debt. Kingsley Holdings now owns 51% of the voting shares of this company. This is no longer a negotiation. This is a hostile takeover. And my first act as majority owner," I leaned forward, mirroring the exact posture he had taken when he cornered me in the bullpen yesterday, "is to terminate Drake Rochester, effectively immediately, for gross negligence and attempted corporate fraud. Security will escort you off my property. Know your place, Drake, because it is no longer here." Deafening silence gripped the 64th floor boardroom, heavy enough to crack the mahogany table. Drake's handsome face contorted into an ugly, desperate mask. The realization that his empire was crumbling beneath the Italian leather heels of the very Omega he had humiliated was finally sinking in. Instead of gracefully accepting defeat, his toxic alpha pride violently short-circuited his rationality. "You little bitch!" Drake roared, his voice devoid of any corporate polish, descending into a primal guttural snarl. He lunged across the table, his hands curled into white-knuckled fists aimed directly for my collar. He intended to physically subjugate me, to use the brute biological strength of an alpha to reassert dominance where his intellect had utterly failed. He never made it halfway. Before I even needed to adjust my posture, Tristan moved. My supposedly beta vice president of acquisitions intercepted Drake's trajectory with terrifying precision. Tristan's hand clamped around Drake's throat, arresting his momentum instantly and slamming him back down into the leather chair with bone-rattling force. Then, the greatest twist of my corporate arsenal was unveiled. Tristan Vasques was not a beta. The scent dampeners Tristan had worn for 6 years, custom-engineered synthetics costing millions, suddenly deactivated with a faint electronic click from his smartwatch. A tidal wave of pure, unadulterated alpha pheromones exploded into the room. It wasn't the aggressive, choking cedar of Drake. It was the scent of petrichor, dark roast coffee, and a deep, rumbling thunderstorm. It was an Enigma-class scent, the rarest and most dominant tier of alpha biology. Every alpha on the board of directors physically recoiled, several instinctively baring their necks in submission. Drake choked, his eyes rolling back slightly as Tristan's pheromones crushed his lungs, rendering him entirely paralyzed. "Mr. Kingsley gave you an order," Tristan whispered, his voice dangerously smooth, his thumb pressing just hard enough against Drake's pulse point to make his threat crystal clear. "You are trespassing. Walk out of this building, or I will have you carried out in a box." I watched the exchange with a calm, satisfied smile. Tristan released him, stepping back perfectly into formation at my right shoulder. "Security," I called out, pressing the intercom button on the console. 2 heavily armed guards from my private detail entered immediately. Drake, gasping for air, his custom suit rumpled and his dignity entirely eviscerated, was hauled to his feet. He didn't look at me as they dragged him out. He couldn't. His spirit was broken. I turned my attention back to the 12 pale, trembling board members. "Now, gentlemen, let us discuss the restructuring of Rochester Innovations. You will be pleased to know I have already secured preliminary backing from Jamie Dimon's private equity network to stabilize our stock price upon the announcement of this acquisition. We have work to do." By 11 p.m. that night, the corporate bloodbath was largely concluded. The SEC filings were submitted, the press releases were meticulously drafted, and the locks on the executive suites had been biometrically recoded. Rochester Innovations was officially a subsidiary of Kingsley Holdings. I sat behind Drake's massive oak desk, though I had already ordered the interior design team to have it incinerated by Monday. The lingering stench of his cedar pheromones had been scrubbed clean by industrial air purifiers, leaving the office smelling only of my winter mint and the deep, comforting petrichor radiating from Tristan, who was pouring 2 glasses of Macallan 25 at the wet bar. "You handled the board beautifully," Tristan said, walking over and handing me the crystal tumbler. His fingers brushed against mine, lingering for a fraction of a second longer than strictly professional. "They were cowards," I replied, taking a slow sip, the amber liquid burning pleasantly down my throat. "They knew Drake was running this place into the ground, but they were too blinded by his alpha posturing to challenge him." Tristan walked around the desk, leaning against the edge of the wood, looking down at me. The ambient city lights from the window cast sharp shadows across his jawline. "Are you angry that I dropped my suppressors?" he asked, his voice softening, the dangerous enigma dropping his guard entirely. "No," I murmured, looking up into his piercing grey eyes. "I've always known what you are, Tristan. You don't hide your true nature from an Omega whose instincts are as sharp as mine. I simply appreciated that you masked yourself all these years. You wanted my success to be mine alone. You knew that if Wall Street saw a powerful Enigma Alpha standing behind me, they would attribute all my brilliant acquisitions to you." Tristan smiled, a genuine, breathtaking expression that he reserved solely for me. He reached out, his large hand gently cupping my cheek. The contact sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core, my Omega biology purring at the proximity of a mate who respected my mind before my body. "You are the most brilliant, terrifying creature I have ever met, Alias," Tristan murmured, leaning down, his scent wrapping around me like a protective blanket. "I am perfectly content being the sword in your hand." Our lips were inches apart, the professional boundaries we had maintained for 6 years finally dissolving into the charged, heavy air between us. Suddenly, my encrypted laptop emitted a shrill, piercing alarm. The romantic tension shattered instantly. I spun my chair around, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Red warning sirens were flashing across the server diagnostic screens. "What is it?" Tristan asked, his posture instantly shifting back to a military-grade alert. "A backdoor protocol," I hissed, my eyes scanning the rapidly scrolling lines of code. "Someone is accessing the subterranean servers. They're bypassing the new biometric locks we installed at 5 p.m. "Drake," Tristan growled, his hands balling into fists. "He still has root access? How?" "He didn't use the standard executive portal," I explained, typing furiously to trace the data packet routing. "He built a ghost layer into the mainframe architecture when he founded the company. The IT audit missed it. He's downloading the entirety of the next-generation biometric encryption patents. Corporate espionage," Tristan realized, pulling his phone out to call our security team. "He's going to steal the intellectual property and sell it to a rival firm to recoup his losses. It's the only thing of value this company actually has." "Look at the destination IP," I pointed at the screen, my heart pounding a steady, furious rhythm. "He's routing the data packets through a series of proxy servers in Switzerland, but the ultimate destination is a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. A shell corporation formerly associated with Bernard Arnault's holding umbrella, though heavily sanctioned. If those patents leave our servers, our $3 billion acquisition is entirely worthless," Tristan said, his voice tight. "Can you sever the connection?" I stopped typing. A cold, predatory smile crept across my face. My wintermint scent spiked sharply, frosting the edges of the room with absolute, calculated malice. "Sever the connection?" I whispered. "Tristan, why would I do that? I'm going to let him finish the download." Tristan looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "Alias, that data is our leverage. If he gets it, he won't get anything but 20 years in a federal penitentiary," I interrupted, spinning my laptop around so Tristan could see the secondary screen I had opened. "When I was playing Artie the Pitiful Omega," I explained, leaning back in my chair and steepling my fingers. "I didn't just organize Drake's calendar. I noticed anomalies in the R&D server cooling logs. I suspected he had an off-the-books data bunker. So 3 days ago, before we even initiated the hostile takeover, I hired a team of ex-Mossad cybersecurity contractors. They didn't lock him out of his ghost layer." I tapped the enter key. A progress bar appeared on the screen, showing Drake's download reaching 98%. "They cloned the ghost layer," I continued, my voice practically humming with victory. "They built a honeypot server. Drake isn't downloading the biometric patents. He is downloading 3 terabytes of randomized, utterly useless junk code, intertwined with a highly aggressive military-grade tracking malware." The progress bar hit 100%, download complete. "Checkmate," I whispered. Instantly, the malware executed. Drake's exact GPS coordinates popped up on a satellite overlay on my screen. He wasn't in a sophisticated hacker den. He was sitting in the VIP lounge of a private airstrip in Teterboro, waiting to flee the country the moment his transaction cleared. "He's at the airport," Tristan said, a dark chuckle escaping his lips. "He's actually trying to run." "Call the FBI Cyber Crimes Division," I instructed Tristan, closing my laptop with a satisfying snap. "Give them the tracking data. Tell them the former CEO of Rochester Innovations has just committed international corporate espionage and is attempting to sell stolen domestic security assets to a sanctioned foreign entity. They will scramble a tactical team before his Gulf Stream even warms its engines." 30 minutes later, we watched the live security feed from the Teterboro airstrip on the wall monitor in my office. Drake Rochester, still wearing the rumpled suit from his humiliating boardroom defeat, was aggressively sipping a martini, entirely unaware of his impending doom. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the VIP lounge shattered inward. A dozen heavily armed FBI agents swarmed the room. Drake jumped up, spittling his drink, attempting to use his alpha pheromones to command the tactical team. It was a pathetic, laughable display. An agent tackled him to the floor, driving a knee into his back and wrenching his arms behind him. The steel handcuffs clicked loudly. A sound echoed perfectly through the live feed. His face, pressed against the expensive carpet of the lounge, was a portrait of total devastation. He had lost his company, his wealth, his reputation, and now, his freedom. I muted the screen. The show was over. "It's done," I breathed out, the adrenaline slowly receding from my system, leaving a pleasant, exhausted warmth in its wake. "The patents are secure. The board is neutered. The company is ours." Tristan stepped closer, gently pulling me out of the leather chair. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling my chest against his. The Enigma petrichor enveloped my wintermint, the two scents swirling together in a perfect harmonious storm. "You are absolutely terrifying," Tristan murmured, kissing my temple. "You're just realizing that," I teased, resting my chin on his broad chest, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. "I've known it since the day I met you," he replied softly, tilting my chin up to meet his gaze. "That's why I am entirely yours." He didn't ask for permission this time. Tristan leaned down and captured my lips in a deep, bruising kiss. It was a declaration of partnership, of biological compatibility, and of absolute devotion. I melted into his embrace, letting the ruthless CEO persona fade away, allowing myself to just be Alias, an Omega who had conquered the Alpha world, and the Enigma who stood faithfully by his side. Drake Rochester had told me to know my place. Looking out over the glittering Manhattan skyline from the top floor of the empire I now owned, wrapped in the arms of the most powerful man in the city, I knew exactly where my place was. It was at the very top. Did Alias's ruthless takedown leave you speechless? In an alpha-dominated world, this brilliant Omega proved that true power doesn't come from biology. It comes from intellect, patience, and a flawless checkmate. If you loved this intense boys love Omegaverse corporate drama, smash that like button, share this story with your friends who love a savage revenge plot, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, high-stakes original stories.